Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. I'm your host Michael, and today we'll be hearing a few stories from Dirk Durham, otherwise known as the Bugler. Now Dirk is known for his calling tactics, and that's why he's on most podcasts. In fact, he's actually a world elk calling champion. He's the director of marketing for Phelps Game Calls, but he's going to stay away from that stuff a little bit today. Today he's going to tell us actually how it all started and when he first began bow hunting. And he's going to finish that up with an encounter that he had with an arsonist in the woods. So he's got some great stories today. I want to thank Dirk again for coming on, and I hope you all enjoy his stories as much as I did recording them. So now, let's go ahead and let Dirk tell you his stories. All right, Dirk, welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I was telling you before we started recording that you were one of the first people that I thought of when I had the idea of putting this kind of storytelling together. And I've heard you tell me some stories that made me laugh pretty hard, and I don't even think you necessarily got to get into the gritty details or any of your favorite stories. You were just walking through some elk calling. So I'm super excited to hear what stories you have for us today. That being said, I know who you are, but I can't guarantee that everybody listening does. So why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
My name is Dirk Durham, a.k.a. The Bugler. If you look me up on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, The Bugler, one word. The marketing manager for Phelps Game Calls. And in my free time, I scout for elk, think about elk, and hunt elk. And then the rest of the time I do what my wife wants me to do. So
yeah, that sounds pretty familiar. I'm just basically putting in goodwill with the family so you can get out for elk season, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I got to ask, I've never asked this before, but the Bugler, I obviously know that you're a elk calling champ. Where exactly did the name come from? Who gave it to you?
Funny story. So I lived in a little small town in North Idaho called St. Mary's, and I worked at this tire shop. People in the Northwest would know the name of the company. It's Les Schwab. I'd worked there. I was working changing truck tires for all the log truck drivers in town, and this one old guy I kind of befriended. He'd always come in and we'd shoot the shit, and one day he came in and he's like, and he kind of talked a little funny too. And he's like, "Oh, you're the Bugler." I'm like, "What?" And then he's all telling me about it. Well, turns out his nephew was a good friend of mine, and he just found out. So he'd heard that, I'd actually called in a bull for his nephew, and he'd shot it. And anyway, "Oh yeah, you're the Bugler." And anyway, it just kind of stuck. Later on, once I started becoming more interweb savvy, and then there was forums. I don't know. Remember if you used to get on like internet forums like Bowside or any of those places, you had to have a handle. I mean, well, you could just say your name, but that what fun is that, right? So, of course, I put the Bugler. I thought, that'd be a funny, or not funny, but just a moniker that would be fitting. So, I kind of stole that old guy's nickname for me there. So
the old prospector stole his nickname for you. That's good. Cool. Well, I know you probably have hundreds of stories, but why don't you tell us a little bit about like how long you've been hunting, what areas you typically hunt, and a little bit of your background with hunting.
Yeah. So I've been hunting since I was 15 years old. Bow hunting for elk since I was 15. I started deer hunting when I was 12. But this will be my 33rd fall this fall of calling elk, and I cut my teeth on whitetails here. I live in north central Idaho. I grew up in north central Idaho, and we had whitetails. People think Idaho, they think mule deer, right? Well, where I grew up, there were very few mule deer. There were a few, but not a lot. It was more kind of farm country, big heavy timber, kind of a big tall high plateau. It wasn't super mountainous. So there were tons of whitetails. So I started hunting whitetails from age 12 on, and I just fell in love with it. And then I got addicted to elk hunting. When I turned 15, I started bow hunting for elk, and I haven't missed a season yet. So
That's awesome. Yeah, you've got a few years on me. I think I'm coming up here on basically year number 4. So
oh yeah.
slow and steady. I don't wouldn't say I'm closing the gap, but I'm at least catching up as far as the total years. Cool, Dirk. All right. Well, let's get to it, man. Why don't you set the stage for the story that you want to tell? You can let us know kind of how long ago was it, what you were hunting for, and go from there.
So the year was 2009, and I had some cousins coming to Idaho to hunt with me. They're from Florida. They're complete greenhorns, right? Flatlanders. Um, they'd never seen an elk, never heard an elk, other than on probably a Primo's video. And anyway, I thought I should slip out and get a little bit of hunting in before they got there. So my brother-in-law and I were out hunting, and um, we had to go. We had to leave that evening after the evening hunt to go back home and then go to the airport and pick up these cousins of mine. But anyway, I said, we should hike down this trail. I've never hunted down there before, and we'll go hike off this trail and bugle down in this hellhole. He's like, okay, yeah, sounds good. So we start walking down this trail, and it's pretty brushy. If you know anything about North Idaho, then you'll know that it's brushy as hell. We got more brush. Well, we have some places have just as much brush as like the West Coast, the coastal region.
Mhm.
Theirs is just different. We don't have a lot of stuff that'll poke you or draw blood, but there's a lot of just nasty ass brush that it's really hard to get through. But anyway, walking down this trail is pretty brushy, and there was a windfall, and I went to step over it, and I looked on the other side of the windfall. And there's a guy laying there, and I'm like, "What the hell?" And I kind of backed up. I didn't want to startle him,
Yeah,
and
it's taking a snooze.
I was looking at him there, and I kind of like took a little photograph in my head of the scene, and I kind of backed up. My brother-in-law was like, what's going on?" I'm like, "There's a guy laying there." He's like, "A guy?" I'm like, "Yeah." Well, whenever I seen him about the same time as I said there's a guy laying there, um, inside my puny little brain, the hamster wheel started squeaking, and I started like adding things up. It's like, okay, why is there a guy laying here? There's a half-gallon carton of orange juice right next to him. I'm like, that's weird. And then all of a sudden, a light bulb goes up off in my head. So rewind to a couple weeks before, and I had my family up there camping, and it was Labor Day weekend. We were up there camping, doing a little hunting, and there was a Forest Service bathroom close by, and it was a couple hundred yards from our camp, so you'd have to walk down the road to this spot. And my son walked down there to use the bathroom, and he had to go talk to a man about a horse, if you will. And he gets down there to the bathroom, and the door's locked, and there's no cars around, and it's just there's nobody camped there where the bathroom is, and he wiggles the handle, and somebody inside says, "Occupied." He's like, "Huh, that's kind of weird." So he waits, and then pretty soon this guy comes out. I said, "Well, what do you look like?" He's like, "Well, you look like a hobo." I'm like, "A hobo?" I said, "Like a hippie?" He's like, "No, no, a hobo." I'm like, "Huh." I'm like, weird. I said, "Was he carrying a backpack or anything, or a suitcase? What did he have? A gun? Did he have a
Stick with a
bow?
satchel attached to it.
Did he have a bow staff? I mean, what did he?"
Yeah.
And he said the only thing he had was a half-gallon of orange juice, a carton of orange juice. And I'm like, huh, well, that's weird. Well, where we lived, or where not necessarily where we live. Well, we lived pretty close to there, but this area would draw a lot of hippies and through hikers, right? And I'm just
Mhm.
like, yeah, there's probably some weird hippie through hiker guy or something. No, when we thought nothing of it. So he went to the bathroom, and he come out, but the guy must have given him the willies a little bit, because he said when he came out, he had his knife out. My son had his knife out, and he was kind of swiping this way and waving it around like he was going to cut somebody if they were close to him as he opens the door. I said, well, why'd you do that? He's like, well, that guy looked kind of sketchy. I'm like, well, what would you have done if you'd have cut him and he'd meant you no harm? Well, I don't know. But anyway, so all this is going through my head. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, orange juice, the guy in the bathroom. And then I rewind even further in my pea-sized brain. Earlier that summer, a guy had burned his house down, actually his parents' house down. This guy was a middle-aged fellow, and his folks were elderly, and he burnt their house down with them in it. And he fled, right? And he fled up to the mountains. Well, I remember seeing like a big crater burnt in the road up there. Well, I guess he drove as far as he could, got stuck in the snow, and then torched his car. Burned it too. I guess he was a pyromaniac. He'd spent time in prison for arson before, and this guy was a real nut. Well, anyhow, my brother's like, yeah, you'll probably see that guy up there up hunting this fall. I'm like, no, that he probably ditched his car and he's probably in Arizona by now.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, all of this stuff clicks in my head. I'm like, oh my God. Well, when he burnt the house down, his mom died. It killed her, and the dad almost passed away. So I'm like, it's the murderer. And my brother-in-law was like, what? And I give him the quick and dirty story, and he's like, oh, and he pulls out his pistol like he's going to do something, and start, pointing it around. I'm like, we got to back up. So we backed up because that summer we'd camped up there, and the sheriff's department had put little flyers everywhere at the guy's picture and said, this guy's armed and dangerous. Don't try to apprehend him. Call it in. And so we're kind of freaked out a little bit. It's like, I don't know if you ever like come upon anybody sleeping in the woods, which I have. Different story. I come across a guy. I thought he was dead, but I walked up. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's dead. And I'm like, hey man, are you okay? And he jumps up, scared the holy shit out of him. But anyway, so I didn't want to scare this guy, especially if he was armed and dangerous. Who knows? Maybe he would come awake and shoot. So we backed up about 100 yards, and it's so brushy he couldn't see us. And so we start talking. I'm like, well, what are we going to do? And well, there was a lady camped down by the bathroom at this point. And so my brother-in-law, he went down, talked to her, and sent her to town to get the sheriff. I said, yeah, tell her to tell the sheriff that it's a hostage situation and we have this guy at gunpoint. That way they'll hurry. Sometimes, if you're jaywalking, you're going to get a ticket, right? Yeah. But if there's a serious situation, maybe they don't respond in time. I don't know. That was kind of a low blow, but because I do like our police. But anyway, trying to be funny. But anyhow, he comes back up. Yeah, I sent her to town. Well, town was about 40-minute drive. So she drives in, comes back. This guy's still sleeping, and he goes down again. She's like, yeah, I told him, but she's like, they have to come from another place, which is about a 3-hour drive. The county seat for this place, we're pretty rural here. We're out in the middle of nowhere. The county seat's a 3-hour drive. So it'll be a while before the cops get here. So we hang out, and finally it's starting to get dark, and a big storm's starting to roll in. And
still sleep?
And yeah, well, I don't know if you ever. I don't know. I kind of take some naps and lay around in the woods. If this guy's been laying up there and hanging out in the woods, maybe that's his little spot he likes to hide and sleep. I didn't really get a good look at him, And we're like, man, we gotta apprehend this guy, because what if he slits our throat in our sleep, or if we have our family up there and he gets one of our kids or something. So we're like, all right, we got to get this guy. So my brother-in-law, he says, well, I've got some training. He was in the Air Force. I've got some training on taking hostages. So he's like, all right, we got a role play. He's like, all right, you get down on your knees and, okay, take your feet, cross them on the back, and And then he's like, all right, you tie a knot like this. And he tied me. And then he's like, all right, your turn. So I had to tie him and, do the same thing. And he's like, all right, I think we're ready. So we sneak up there. We get closer. And you just can't see this guy until you stand right over him because there's so much brush, right?
Yeah.
So we sneak up, and we get close. And we're like, all right. He's got a pistol, and all I got is my bow. So I got my bow. I got an arrow knocked up in case this crazy person comes up with a shotgun or something. And so we start throwing like pine cones at first and nothing. Pick up a little stick and throw it, and trying to get him to come to or figure out what the deal is. And we keep throwing stuff, and there's no reaction. And finally, I'm like, "Hello, we're hunters. Hello, we mean you no harm." We look at each other. It's like he didn't react, and I'm like, "We're hunters. We have medicine." And I don't know why I said we have medicine, but I guess I'd seen some old westerns where the pioneers were trying to be non-threatening to the Native Americans by saying we have medicine or something. I don't know, but that was kind of dumb to say. But anyway, my brother-in-law looks at me and puts his hands up like, what are you saying? You have medicine? You have medicine? So I'm like pointing him. I start waving him. I start pointing. I'm like, move up. And he starts moving up, and he gets up there, and he's like right over the guy. He just cannot see the guy's face. And then finally he sees his face, and he's like, oh, he's dead. So this guy's dead, deader than mackerel. He'd been there for a few days, but I kind of thought the scene would look different, but his eyes were all shriveled up, looked like raisins. It was just weird, but yeah, it wasn't smelly or stinky or nothing. It was odd. But the weirdest thing, the way he was dressed in like semi-dressy clothes. Like, so if you're going to go to a semi-formal gathering, he had like a sport coat and he had 2 or 3 of those, and like nice button-up shirts and slacks and like nice shoes, and like it was so weird. It's like he put on 2 or 3 pairs of stuff too to try to keep warm. I think. But
credit to your boy that saw him at the bathroom saying he's a hobo, because hobos, whenever you see them in cartoons or movies, they're always wearing like a sports jacket that like with
I know. It all made sense. I'm like, oh, he looks just like your stereotypical hobo, of the old, olden day films. It's funny. But
did it end up being the guy who started the fires, or was it just
it was the guy.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had to go in and for questioning afterwards, and it finally, the cops, they didn't get there until like 6 hours after the call was placed. We got there in the middle of the night, and it was a pouring ass rain.
Right, the hostage situation.
Yeah. And here's the crazy part. Before this guy beat him there, it was the coroner beat him there before the police officer made it. I'm like, what the hell? The coroner, I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, the coroner said, he's like, oh yeah, it's the sheriff's, it's his retirement party tonight, and most of the guys got drunk. He's like, so he was out of a complete different town and state. He had to come from a complete different town and state, and then finally some other cop showed up, and I guess he must have been the only sober one.
Yeah, we got not invited to the party.
Yeah. He's on the shit list. But so that's the way it is. But whenever I had to go in for my questionnaire with the local police, then they said that they'd had reports of that guy being up there, and they'd gone up and looked for him, and they never could find him, and which was weird. They'd had reports he would ask people for food, and it was a popular road and rail area, and he'd see people, and they'd go back and say, hey, we think we saw the guy, and well, we found him, I guess. And,
did they ask you if you offered him any medicine?
No. I don't know if I'd have shared it, but what the crazy part is, I had my camper trailer up there. It'd been up there since like August 30th or August 26th or something, and this was like September 20th. I mean, my camper had been up there. I had left the doors unlocked, the whole time because I didn't want somebody to break a window to find out there's nothing of value in there. But I did have like sleeping bags and like canned food and chili and all sorts of stuff like that he could have taken, but he hadn't set foot in it.
Interesting. How long do they think he was passed before you guys found him?
2 or 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah. I had a buddy that was the deputy coroner there locally, and he examined the guy, and he said he passed away from just exposure. Basically, he pretty much starved to death and probably got hypothermic and then passed away, but died.
Was there anything in the orange juice canister?
We looked, and I think he'd been putting water in it by the looks of it. And then he had an old flashlight, like the long ones, you know. It looked like he'd pulled all the guts out, and he'd been putting huckleberries in there. These little berries that grow in the mountains. He'd been filling it full of huckleberries because there was huckleberries in it, and it kind of had fallen out of it whenever he laid down there. And I don't know if he just laid down and just died, or if he tripped over that log and fell. And
Yeah.
his face was up. He was face up. He wasn't face down. So I don't know. It was weird, but that was the second guy I found that year dead. So
in that 1 year.
yeah, I found 2 guys dead that year. Just
how
weird.
many total have you found? If 2 in 1 year.
2.
Okay, but they just happened to be in the same September.
Yeah. Well, the other one was earlier in July. It was 4th of July weekend, and I took my family up to a camping area and left them with my wife with her grandma and all of her relatives, and I had to go back to work. So on my way back home to work, then this nasty old windy road, then come across this Jeep that had rolled, and the guy had passed away, and there had killed him, and so that was kind of a bad bummer deal.
Yeah.
The motor was still running, and music was blaring, and yeah, it was weird. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a story I could share that is similar, but I won't because those are sad stories.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and move on. That's interesting, though. I've never heard of anyone capturing a pyro murderer before. So
yeah, and we wondered. I'm like, well, where's our reward? There should be some reward money for this wanted fugitive, and they're like, yeah, there's no reward money. I'm like, what the heck? All that work and no reward money.
Yeah, that's funny. Now, why is he covered in pine cones and sticks? Oh yeah, sorry guys.
Yeah.
All right, Dirk, that's awesome. Well, what else do you have for us? Any other stories that are maybe a little less human death involved?
Yeah. So here's a good one. So when my brother-in-law and I first started hunting together, we were actually 15-year-old schoolboys. We decided to get into bow hunting at the same time. So we both worked our asses off all summer putting up hay for farmers. And we saved all of our money, and we both bought bows, arrows, all the stuff, camo, you name it. Back then, I think you could get into all that stuff for about $500-600, right?
Yeah, that's good old days.
You can't hardly buy anything for $500 or $600 these days, but
like one jacket,
pair of boots.
Yeah.
But anyway, then we knew a lot of the farmers around there locally, and they're like, they had elk on their place, and like, yeah, you can hunt. So opening day, comes, and we're all excited, and we're ready, and we've got all of our stuff, and we drive out to the spot by Farmer Joe's house, and there's elk in the field, right? There's elk in this wheat field. They hadn't cut it yet. It'd been kind of a cold, wet, late summer there, and they hadn't cut all the wheat. And so the elk were in there, and they were already bugling. So we're like, all right, what's the plan? Well, we got to get close, and we'll start calling. We'd never hunted elk with a bow a day in our life up until now. We'd watched a lot of videos, good old Larry D. Jones and all those kind of vintage videos of how to hunt elk, but we'd never done it. But we'd been practicing with our calls, and well, as luck would have it, I forgot my grunt tube at home, and my buddy, he forgot his diaphragms at home, but he had a grunt tube. And I'm like, hey, give me your tube and I'll call that bull in. He's like, no, I'll call it in. So there was my my buddy, my brother-in-law. We've always been a little competitive with each other, and I think he thought I was going to call it in for me instead of for him. So
Yeah.
we hadn't worked out the teamwork, I guess, and team calling at that point in our life. So anyhow, so he all he had was one of those. I don't know if you remember. There's this elk call. It's called. It's built by Elk Inc. It's called the Cow Talk, and it's a little plastic thing that's almost looks like two credit cards stuck together. They kind of have an arch in between them to create a cavity, and then there's like a little black rubber band looking thing in there, and you blow on it. It makes kind of like an elk sound. It kind of sounds like a weird bird too. So he puts that. He just jabs that into the end of his tube, and he starts bugling with that thing, and it sounds like shit. Well, I didn't have a tube, so I start bugling into my hand with my reed. I'm like, well, I seen old Dwight Schrute do this when he was hunting on the Larry D. Jones show. So I start doing that. Well, the bull, he's answering, and he's got probably 20, 30 cows. He's running back and forth, and the cows are starting to move off, and he's starting to move off with them. And he gets down to the other end of the field, and it's like, well, they could see you if you try to walk out, but the wheat was probably waist high. Well, my brother-in-law, my best friend at the time, he gets this bright idea. So he hunches over and he puts his bow up over his head like it's an elk rack. And then he takes that tube and he just starts blowing on it, and he starts kind of bouncing out through the wheat there. And I'm watching this whole thing unfold, and I watched that bull, and that bull sees him. You could just see him like take notice, like he sticks his head up and he's like, what the? And that bull just came at a dead run, charging across the field. Well, when he did that, my brother-in-law, he disappeared into the wheat. He ducked down and got in the wheat and got ready. Well, the bull runs right up to him, and I'm like, why isn't he shooting him? And then pretty soon the bull kind of jumps and dances around and then just runs off and bugles a few more times and takes these cows and leaves. And pretty soon after the elk left the field, then he gets up out of the wheat and comes over. I'm like, what happened? He's like, I missed him. I'm like, how could you miss him? He was just like right there. And he's like, I don't know. I pulled back and I shot and I missed. But come to find out, he has a thing called target panic.
I've heard of
it. Really bad target panic. In fact, so we were 15 then. He probably didn't figure it out until he was probably 20, 21. And he was sitting in a tree stand. He was going to shoot a cow, elk. It was legal to shoot a cow. And he pulled back, and he just about ready to release. And then he stops himself and realizes he's not looking through his peep sight, nor is he looking at his sights at all. He was just pointing his bow at the elk. And oh man. So he let down, pulled back, looked through the sights, shot it, killed the elk. And he's like, you know what?
His first harvest?
Yeah, that was his first archery kill. And he's like, you know what? I figured out what I've been doing wrong all these years. I haven't been, I just been kind of losing my shit, not even using my sights, which makes sense because the second day of season, then him and I, we had both had both of our calls, and we're like, all right, we're splitting up. So we split up and for the morning hunt. And when he got back, he didn't have any more arrows left. He had missed 6 different bulls that morning. Of course, I went the wrong direction. I hardly had any luck that day, but he'd missed 6 of them things. And I'm like, how do you miss? I mean, he was a really good shot, but come to find out, he was just blacking out when he'd pull his bow back to shoot an elk and then not aiming with his sight.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. So
I bet you gave him hell for coming back with no arrows and no elk.
Yeah. Oh, I laughed my ass off. And he was pretty bummed out. He's like, oh man. Well, he had bought 12 to hunt with, and he's like, oh man, I'm glad I bought 12 to hunt with. I think I only bought 6 to hunt with. So he was like, man, I'm glad I got these extra arrows, but we had to go back home to get them. But
did you end up going out later that season and getting anything? Or obviously he didn't, but did you have any luck?
So the third day of season, he he was supposed to go, but he got grounded because he was lipping off to his old man or something, and he got in trouble, right?
It's
You
like,
know,
what'd you do with my arrows?
stupid teenagers, and he gets in trouble with his old man, and he can't go. He's grounded. He can't go hunting that morning. So I get up. Well, he had a driver's license. I didn't. So my mom, she gets up and takes me hunting because I don't have a driver's license. So we get out to this other spot, and there's some elk in the field, and I'm like, keep going, keep going. We get up in the timber, and there's an old logging road that kind of goes out there, and I had her park, and I got out, walked over there, and started calling, and Bull was just immediately just answering,
Yeah.
just picking up everything I was doing, and pretty soon he's getting closer. I'm like, oh man, this is going to happen. Pretty soon here he comes, and this old logging road, I mean, it's actually kind of an old rock road. It's uh, not a main road, but it's well traveled. Just up like 30 yards away, there's a road grader parked, and because they've been logging in there. Anyway, this bull steps out right in the road, and I shoot this thing at 15 yards, and he runs off a couple hundred yards and piles up. Well, when my dad said, "Well, you can't kill an elk with a bow," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, you can. People do it every year." He's like, "Oh, damn bow hunters," and he's like, "Well," and then whenever I saved up all my money and bought all the equipment, he's like, "Wow, you're really into this." I'll tell you what, if you kill a bull elk with your bow, I'll pay you back for all the stuff you bought, all
Oh,
your bow,
wow.
all your stuff. I'm like, all right. So I go back to the truck, tell my mom, I said, yeah, I got him, got that bull. Of course, she was so excited. And so I sent her back home to get my dad, and I stayed there with the elk. And she went back and she walked in the house and said, "You better get your come along and your $500 because Dirk shot an elk." And he's like, "What? That didn't happen." And he's like, "He did. He did get a bull." And so he was pretty excited about that. He told about every single person he knew of that the same the little story about him having to pay
Yeah.
me back. So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Um,
Probably the best $500 he ever lost in a bet right there.
yep, yep. And it was flat country too. The old logging roads and skid trails and cat roads, as some people call them. And we were able to pull my dad's old beater wood cutting truck up there, and we took a come along and come along that thing whole into the back of the truck. And
That's awesome.
yeah, that was cool, man. It was my first bull. It was a nice 5x6, and it took a few
That's a
years
great
for me to
story.
get a better one.
Yeah. The first bull I killed, we got out whole as well. But we actually just had six guys. Some random hunters came along as we were there, and it was up on top of this hillside. Just
Oh,
dragged it down the hill, and the truck bed put the tailgate down right onto the hill, slid it right in, no
yeah.
problem. Took it back to camp, and then we used to come along to actually crank it up into a tree. So it's pretty great to get a whole elk out.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. You skin it leisurely, skin it, and it's easy to don't get a bunch of dirt on it and stuff.
Yep,
But
absolutely.
we between my brother and I, we loaded a whole shitload of elk whole until we started having to pack them. Then it's like once the secret kind of got out that there was a lot of elk in that area, then we had to start going other places. We started going hunting the mountains, and then we had to start packing them out on our backs. And we didn't we didn't know anything. We didn't know what we were doing. We totally kind of screwed that up. we you know it's, we had like instead of having like well today might go out with a Kafaru or an EXO or brand whatever uh, backpack that has a frame, a structured frame with uh, with a bag with all your necessities from food and water and game bags and safety equipment and first aid and everything. Well,
Yeah.
back then, I think I had like a, a pocket knife and a Mountain Dew and a tarp and some of them shitty cheesecloth game bags in
Yeah.
in a, in a in a polar fleece backpack that felt like the bottom was going to fall out of it with that stuff in it. Like it was super. no good, you know. And
Yeah.
um, that's how we started hunting the mountains. And he, my brother shot this bull way down in this shithole, and so he shoots it, and we're like, "Oh man, this is great!" So we get over there and we bone it out, get it all boned out in bags, and we're like, "Man, this is going to be a long hike out of here." So we didn't have pack frames with us, right? So the first trip out, we didn't carry any meat. I mean, our other packs wouldn't have carried. I mean, it probably would have broke them.
Yeah.
So we walk out with no load. So that, God, that was stupid. Um, compared to what we do today. And then so we
Yeah.
get all the way out and we get back home like, hey, I'm gonna grab my dirt bike and there's a trail that'll go in there about a mile because it was 2 or 3 miles in. And I'm like, we'll cut a trail that we'll cut some windfalls out of the trail and we'll take the dirt bike in and then I'll just shuttle meat on the dirt bike. Okay, cool. So he shot this bull in the morning. So we get back to town, grab the stuff, go back up, start cutting windfalls out. And pretty soon it's like, man, this is not going as fast as we'd hope. We just got to get down there and start packing meat. So, and it was nice and cold out. There was no worry of losing any meat. So we hike down to the elk, get our packs loaded up for the first trip and start hiking and look up and these big, huge snowflakes start falling and they're just huge. They're size of golf balls, right? Just huge snowflakes. And we're not really prepared for this kind of, it's September and we're not prepared for that. We didn't have any Gore-Tex or anything like that.
Yeah.
I had army surplus fatigue pants and like a long sleeve cotton shirt and some boots that did not have any waterproofing in them. Just this is like 1994, I think. No, 95. I mean, we were not prepared. Anyway, we get about halfway out. My brother, he's leading the way. I'm like, hey, where are you going? He's like, I can't see a thing. He had glasses on. It was really wet. And he couldn't see nothing. I'm like, Jesus, let me lead the way. At least I know which way to go. So we get back on the trail and we sit down. And I'm like, man, I'm just so tired. I could just fall asleep right here. I'm like, wait a minute. That's crazy talk. That's that's like hypothermic.
Yeah.
That's where people just like sit down, take a nap, and never wake up, right?
Yeah.
Let's just shed this meat right here. Let's leave it right here. It's cold, it's snowing. Let's leave the meat right here. We'll go hike out. We'll come back tomorrow. Well, we ended up getting another guy to help us, but it took 3 days to pack that thing out. 3 of us to pack that thing out. Would have took much less time had we been prepared and had known what we were doing. But, sometimes, experience is the best teacher.
Yeah. I always say, I've said this in other podcasts, but the best lessons are self-taught.
Yeah. Yeah. You screw something up and, you're probably not going to do that again. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, the whole backpack conversation that you were having there. I shot a whitetail in Texas, and it was a big whitetail.
yeah.
And I had a nice pack with a frame on it. And so my buddy that was with me, that was going to help me pack this thing out, and we wanted to do it in one trip. He had like a JanSport, like that 1990s. Everybody had that JanSport, and that's what he brought. And it was green, so he thought it was good enough for hunting.
Sure.
But I think I took 3 of the quarters and all of like the head, and he took a 1 front quarter and like the prime cuts, and he couldn't stop complaining. Like I had probably 80% of the weight, and he was just like, "Oh, this is awful. This is terrible." So he actually bought one of those frame packs, I think, our next hunting trip. So I can understand where you guys were at when none of you had them.
Yeah. It was just dumb, but we didn't know what we were doing. And
Yeah.
there were those kind of shitty backpacks we had, and then there was the good old fashioned just green pack frame, that had the little table thing that would fall down,
Yeah.
that had the little camo mesh material there that you could put your quarter on. You could buy one of those for about $50, and you get about one and a half trips, and the straps just start breaking off of it, and those things were garbage and uncomfortable. My brother said, "Oh, these are a torture device more than a pack frame."
Yeah.
I've just gears come so far, I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, it really has. It really has. I didn't experience any of that stuff, and by the time I was hunting, social media and all those things, I probably had better gear than I needed for my first couple hunts. But
Oh yeah.
I believe it. I believe that there were some pretty awful things that people worked with back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah. When I hunted stuff around town, it was, I was, I was wearing tennis shoes. I'd wear my last year's tennis shoes, elk hunting. They were pretty dirty. So they were white, but they'd get pretty dirty. So they just wouldn't show up, bright white sneakers coming, but, yeah, it's funny that, well, I didn't really need them, but, today the places I go, man, unless I've got like a really, really, really good pair of boots, it's pretty hard to traverse some of that steep, nasty stuff. I mean, I feel like there's probably some dudes that like some little skinny dudes that could probably walk around out there in tennis shoes, but man, not me.
Yeah, no, me either. I've actually even last season, I have good boots. I have a good pair of Crispies, but the laces blew up on me like
Oh
halfway.
yeah.
I was at 2 miles from camp with a lot of elevation, and it just snapped off, just completely snapped. And so I like relaced the whole boot. Had about 4 inches of laces on each side to try and tie something together just to get back to camp.
Oh
I
yeah.
had to spend basically half a day driving to town just to get shoelaces. So there's a mistake I'll never make again.
Yeah, that could be like one of the most forgotten things in your pack, or at least back at camp, is having a pair of shoelaces, or at least having paracord that could double for it or something.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I've broke a few shoelaces. Seems like I always wear them till they break. I don't like replace them ahead of time, like you're probably supposed to.
Yeah, me too. I actually went to the store and bought some, and I was like, this seems like they're long enough. They're not long enough. I bought very short shoelaces. They work for now, but I still need to replace them for the upcoming season.
Oh yeah. Well, I've always got 50 feet of paracord in my pack, and that way, hanging elk quarters, tying up an elk. Sometime you kill an elk in a really bad place, and
Yeah,
killed some bulls in some bad places by myself, where I had to tie the elk to a tree so it wouldn't slide down the hill. Um,
crushes or gutting it.
yeah, yeah, or roll to the bottom. Um, and I've used even that paracord for shoelaces. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, that's great, Dirk. Do you have any other stories that you have on the top of your head? If not, you've given us plenty. I mean, two dead guys and a couple dead elk.
Yeah, I can't really think of any right offhand here, any others, but I got tons of them. If it seems like something sparks the story, and it's like, oh yeah, and then I could tell
Yeah.
what. But yeah, those are I feel like those are some of my most interesting ones, or the ones that make me chuckle the most.
I bet. Cool. Well, Dirk, then thank you so much for coming on the Hunting Stories podcast. These were fun stories. You officially the first dead person story. So
Yeah,
I have a
good.
feeling eventually we'll get more of those. We've already had some antelope, some underpants, some Sasquatch, all sorts of different things, but no dead people yet. So thank you for sharing with us, man.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. Is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And before we sign off here, why don't you tell the people like where they can find you, YouTube, Instagram, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, yeah. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, The Bugler, one word. Yeah, I'm usually on there. So um, sometimes I have good stuff, and sometimes I have dumb stuff. Well, I've got a weird sense of humor, so some people get it and some people don't. You may watch it and be, this guy's the dumbest idiot I've ever laid eyes on, and the next person might think this guy's a genius. So I put things that I think are funny on my social, or on my any of my videos or whatever. If I know it's a acquired taste. Maybe not everybody thinks it's funny, but I do.
Yeah. I think you put some pretty good stuff out there. I think that the School of September podcast you do with Jim Huntsman,
Yeah.
that shit's the funniest. Every year you guys do that, and every year that's the first one I listen to every time because it's such good stuff. So,
Oh
well,
yeah.
Dirk, thanks again, man. It's been a lot of fun. I'm sure you'll probably call me in like half an hour and say, "Oh, I have a bunch more stories," so we'll save them for the next episode somewhere down the road.
Yep. Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right, thanks, Dirk.
Thank you. Yep.
All right, guys, that's it. another couple stories in the books. I want to thank Dirk Durham, of course, for coming on and sharing the stories with us. I can't imagine finding one dead person in the woods, let alone two dead people in the woods in one season. So it was a really unique story, and the first, maybe of many, dead people being found by hunters. Beyond that, the standard stuff, I need you to go to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, like, follow, share, do everything you can to spread the good word. We're growing this podcast and we're having a lot of fun. I also want to throw out there that if you have a good story, please let us know. I've actually had a couple people start to reach out who've said, I've got a crazy story, I have to be on your podcast, and we've got them scheduled. And I can't wait to hear their stories and share them with you. So keep that in mind, folks. Share, reach out to us, give us feedback. Either way, thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. Now go make some stories of your own. Thank you.